Thank you, Paul. Hi, everybody. That's me. I'm the president of TVision, and if you don't know TVision, what we do is we measure what's previously been unmeasurable, which is how do people actually watch TV? And I'll tell you more about what that means, but it's critical to understand that we know what is actually happening on the TV when people are watching it. So we have spent a lot of time, energy, and product resources building out better and better streaming capabilities. And what I want to do today is take you through some of the findings, some of the data points that our clients are getting from us today. Fair warning, I brought a lot of data, so I'm going to move through this with some pace. The last slide has a link, so if you want to dig a little deeper, spend a little time with the data, download it, and grab myself or one of my colleagues later today, and happy to answer any questions you have. So a couple of initial slides here. Pay TV is still big. SVOD services are growing fast. None of you are surprised by this. That's why you're all here today. However, why people are adopting streaming services as much as they are? Well, one, it's great content. Obviously, there's a lot of premium, very high quality content that can be found through streaming services. But second, it's just a whole lot easier for people to watch what they want to watch, when they want to watch it, and how they want to watch it. And a survey from Roku shows, 3/4 of people just think using streaming is way more convenient than other TV. That other quarter, I can't account for them, but I tend to agree it's just a lot more convenient. But that creates some real industry challenges for us as measurement companies and as marketplace constituents. The industry was fragmented enough already when there was broadcast and a growing tail of cable networks as well, but now it's kind of gone 3D, where there are all these new devices, and then this whole layer of applications on top, and then this exploding amount of new content, as well as the availability of library content. So that makes it really hard to keep track of what's actually happening. And what we're starting to see is really TV walled gardens, where everybody's got their own little view of data. Roku's got their view, AT&T their own, Netflix their own. So these big pools of data, but nobody sees each other's pools. So it's really hard for anybody to have a great idea of what's actually happening and how people are actually streaming content. So add to that multiple screens and it gets even harder. So from a technological point of view, it's challenging for all of us as measurement companies to provide great reporting to you guys. So that's why we've been really focused on this. The multi-screen thing is important to talk about, though, because when we're talking about streaming, by and large, we're talking about the TV screen. On the left here is Hulu's internal data showing the steady rise of their activity occurring on the home TV screen, as opposed to tablets and mobile phones. That chart is old. They haven't updated it publicly, but I think they did say earlier this year that it is over 80% now. That's borne out if you're looking at industry data on the right that shows it's about 93% of all time consuming video that happens on that TV screen. So that's a combination of linear and streaming, and that red part is growing fast, but linear is still huge, obviously. What we do, speaking of linear, at TVision is we measure both, and we measure how people actually engage with what they're seeing. So this is a slide that we presented at the ARF conference in the spring that looks at attention rates. How attentive are people to ads that they see in an OTT, or streaming environment, versus a linear TV environment? And what it shows is that when people choose what they're going to watch, they pay far more attention, not just to the content, but to the ads that are playing during that content. And that's borne out across every day part. Similarly, it's across every age group. It's not just, say, younger viewers that are more attentive to ads. It's everybody that's more attentive. And that's really critical to understand. So that's some kind of baseline data. Now we'll dig into some of the streaming-specific data. So I'll spend a minute on our methodology. And it's important to understand how we collect data to understand the metrics that I'll show you next. So we've recruited a panel nationally that deploys our solution in their home. It's a little piece of hardware that sits in their home. It's 100% opt-in, privacy safe, and it does a couple of critical things. One is it measures what's actually on the TV. Is it The Voice? Is it a Geico commercial? Is it Stranger Things? We have to know that. Second is we have to know how it got there. Is this the voice through live linear TV? Or is this the voice through the Hulu app on a Roku? Or through the NBC app on Chromecast? How are people consuming this? Because it's important for everybody to know, especially advertisers. They might buy media differently based on that information. And then critically, we measure what's actually happening on the other side of the TV. So our system has a camera in it. It doesn't record video, but it processes images of what's happening. So every second, it's looking at multiple frames to know, is there anybody in the room? If so, who is in the room? We recognize them and connect their demographic profile data. How many people are in the room? Is there co-viewing happening? And then critically, for each person, are they actually looking at the TV or are they looking away? Talking to somebody on their phone, looking out the window? Are they engaging with what's on the TV? So we collect all that data, weight it, make sure it's representative to create the metrics that I'll show you next. So we'll start with binging. So binging for us, we define it as watching 3 or more episodes within a session. And we break a session if there's 20 minutes or so of inactivity, not being in the room, the session is ended. So when we look at People 2+, there's a whole lot of kid shows. So there's a lot more binging that happens, and it makes sense if there's shorter programs. So a 30-minute program as opposed to a 60-minute, because that requires an hour and a half of TV watching as opposed to 3 hours. So there's a bit of a bias towards shorter shows. And when we look at the different age groups, you see, and this was for the last month, for the month of September, that Unbelievable was incredibly binged show by everybody, as well as specific demographics like women 18+. Now, co-viewing is another metric that we track for streaming analytics. So this is 2 or more people consuming the content at the same time. And we see some similar stuff with kids shows. I certainly know that's true at my house. My son will have me set up Transformers, and he will watch as many episodes as I'll let him. It just auto-plays to the next one. So we do see a lot of binging, but also the co-viewing where either the parent or another child is in the room at the same time. But you see Patriot Act is one that did really well last month in terms of it's a show that people wanted to watch together, everybody, but also the certain demographic of women 18+. So with these new metrics, I thought it was interesting to look at how does a release schedule for new content affect the way people consume it. So if all the episodes are available on day 1, does that lead to different behavior than if things are released piecemeal on a weekly basis or in batch, really? And what we see that absolutely is true. And we looked at also prior seasons. How do people watch prior seasons of content leading up to a new season release? So lots of interesting case studies that I'll take you through in a minute. One interesting thing we found, which is true for most content, except for maybe kids' content, is there's sometimes an inverse relationship between binging and co-viewing. Is that when you have the time to do a lot of binging, maybe multiple people don't have the opportunity to do that together. And also, when you really want to watch something with somebody else, you may not agree on how much time you're going to allocate to content consumption. So sometimes there's an inverse relationship there as well. So starting with Dead to Me, this was all episodes available on day 1. So what we see at the bottom here is a lot of content consumption right up at the beginning, and then it slowly peters out over time as people have binged it and then they're done. The attention rate here is above average, so index is 100. This is indexed against linear TV, not against all streaming data, so it's against linear TV consumption. So people are very engaged to this program. Also, they binge it heavily, so above average. 35% of the episodes were binged. The average I think we see for streaming is in the mid-20s. And co-viewing rate was about average at 30% of the episodes were co-viewed with somebody else. Now in contrast, if you look at The Handmaid's Tale, that was not all at once. That was a spread out release schedule. And you see some differences in terms of when people watch, lots of episodes up front, and then farther along in the release schedule, people are really engaged again. And then I think, towards the end of the plateau there, when the last episodes were released, and then people, slowly stopped watching. So what's interesting is the attention was still really high. So with either release schedule, people still remained very engaged with the content, no impact on how engaged they were, but certainly a big difference in terms of how they binged the content. They didn't binge it because it really wasn't that much of an option to do that, unless they watched it late and did sort of a catch-up. Also, no real impact on co-viewing. People still wanted to watch that together, and they would find the time to do it. So this is a fun one, Stranger Things. So you look at the season 3 release, which was around the 4th of July week this year, and you see big spikes in viewing seasons 1 and season 2 of Stranger Things leading up to that. Either rewatching or watching it for the first time because they were told that they should watch season 3 of Stranger Things. I don't think we did the rewatch versus first time watch analysis on this, but we could. Interesting here, I thought, was the attention rate was actually lower than I thought. I don't know if that was people were scared and they ran out of the room or covered their eyes, but attention was a little bit lower. Also, the binging was a little lower than I thought, but co-viewing is really high. Stranger Things is something that people really like to watch together. And then some library content, just for extra flavor. We took Friends here and looked at a similar attention rate versus Stranger Things, but heavy binging and actually low co-viewing. So you read this as more of a guilty pleasure TV. People do it largely when they're on their own. They'll watch a whole lot of these, not necessarily with somebody. It's just sort of comfort food. And if you look at the bottom, it's a bit of a spaghetti chart in terms of what they're watching. No real rhyme or reason there. They're watching all episodes, all seasons, sort of all the time. So this drive towards streaming and the behavior that I'm talking about here today, we looked at who's actually using the streaming devices. And it's driven largely by households that have kids. So that's on the far left here. And then for the rest, households without kids slowly declines with age. So the younger people are more likely to be using streaming devices, and it makes sense as the demographic ages, they're a little bit less likely to be using their streaming devices. What's interesting around the devices is that what device you use impacts what applications and content you see. I think in the old sort of cable model, where there were more dumb pipes, there wasn't really any way to control what people watched. But when you control the experience, you see some real differences in terms of what applications people use based on the device that they see. So here's looking at Roku versus Chromecast, for example. And you see that for, Netflix is still big, but people that are using Chromecast use less Netflix. They use less Amazon, and they use more YouTube, and they use more Chromecasting on their Chrome device as well. So as you start to think about how does device impact usage, how does application usage impact what content people look at, it's really important to have this sort of data because subscriber numbers don't really tell the whole story. So if you were to just look at the column charts here of how many subscribers do these services have, you can make some false assumptions here. So we overlaid our own usage data, and you show that Amazon Prime Video, although their subscribers are really high, actual usage is much lower. I know that's true for me. I started using Prime Video because I wanted free shipping. Now I do use Prime Video, and they absolutely have gotten me using that service, so I use more and more of it, but it's a different approach. That isn't why I became an Amazon Prime subscriber. So we're talking largely about SVOD here today, but it's the ARF, so we should talk about advertising a little bit as well. And what we've found that's really interesting is that while SVOD is the majority of usage, it's not the whole story. There's a really good advertising story here. So let me make it clear, though, I'm not putting a metric out there to say this is the industry benchmark for SVOD versus AVOD. This is sort of a looking at one platform, Chrome. Just for example, I could put a floor on it at 40% of time is spent using advertising supported models. But that's not factoring in ads on Hulu, because those technically I've paid a subscription for that as well. And there are other ad supported applications in there as well. So it's actually probably significantly higher than this. So there's a really big, bright future for advertising and streaming, obviously. So this one's dense. I'm going to talk briefly about it. But this is really interesting in terms of understanding the the way streaming and linear are cooperating and how people are using the two mediums in some ways together. So what we looked at across the horizontal axis at the bottom is we broke our universe into 5 buckets based on how much streaming they did. From heavy streamers on the far left to non-streamers on the far right. And then on the vertical axis, we looked at their linear ad consumption, so linear normal TV. And what we found is that heavy streamers, they're not the cord cutters. They're just people that love TV. So they're watching a ton of linear also. So those top 3 buckets there that we have a square around, those are people that are heavy streamers, but also they see a ton of linear ads as well. People on the far right that aren't streamers at all, well, they're on the bottom right, there are a lot of people that just don't consume a whole lot of TV. So they're not seeing a ton of linear ads either, just not really consuming a whole lot of TV. The cord cutters are really probably the 2 to least sort of people here down at the bottom. They're not seeing linear ads, but they're not huge consumers of streaming media either. So the number of people out there that we're just not really able to reach with TV, it's actually not that big. It's smaller than many of us maybe feared or thought. And attention to these ads is interesting. It's more of a barbell here, where people that consume a lot of streaming media and people that don't consume any at all pay more attention to ads that they see on traditional linear TV than the middle of the barbell, the people that are not heavy streamers or non-streamers, just average TV consumers. So who are these people? Let's talk about person-level streaming behavior. So here we compared Stranger Things viewers versus The Office viewers. And what you see is a pretty even mix on gender for Stranger Things, but for The Office, it skews more towards male. And on the age breakdown, you get Stranger Things viewers being maybe more the 80s nostalgia crowd. I'll put myself in that bucket. Whereas The Office viewers actually skew a little bit younger. And what do they watch on linear? We looked at, and this is ranked based on the number of episodes they're consuming of linear TV. Lots of people watch football, no matter what. So there are some things everybody agrees on. Football, Law and Order. But then there's some interesting things here, where people that watch Stranger Things maybe are watching more reality TV shows. They're watching, in The Office, they're watching maybe more sports, and maybe this is because they bias a little bit more towards men. You see more of that. Maybe one of my biggest takeaways here is that Stranger Things watchers watch a lot of The Young and the Restless, which came out of left field. I didn't see that coming at all, but apparently true. So with that, those are my data points. I'll share the link to get the deck if you're interested in a minute. But this is really complicated stuff. The whole world's gone a little crazy in terms of how TV is being watched, and it makes it really challenging to measure it accurately. So myself and the companies that'll join me on stage on the panel in a minute, we're all focused on figuring this out. But the ability to understand this, especially I think the ability to understand how streaming interplays with linear TV watching, is critical to understand for everybody, whatever role you play in the ecosystem. So with that, I will say thank you and share the link if you're interested.